The ability to special summon monsters kinda goes hand in hand with modern meta decks, so it's very rare for a card to not allow itself to be special summoned and to actually do something useful. So in this list we'll go over 10 of the best cards that cannot be special summoned. And at number 10 we have Yata-Garasu. This card is currently banned and was one of the first banned cards in the game's history, as it was part of the combo with Chaos Emperor Dragon, Envoy of the End, and Sangan, where you could use Emperor Chaos Dragon to get rid of all cards in the field and in both players' hands. Then, use Sangan's effect from the graveyard to add Yata-Garasu from your deck to your hand. Then simply summon Yata-Garasu and attack directly for 200 points of damage, which would lock them out of being able to draw a card, and basically win you the duel, as long as you continue to summon and peck every turn, as your opponent wouldn't be able to play any cards since Yata-Garasu had the effect, where if it attacks directly your opponent skips their next draw phase. It also cannot be special summoned, and it returns to your hand during the end phase, so it seems incredibly weak on surface level, and it really is by itself, but it has the potential to just stop your opponent from being able to play the game, which used to be a big deal back in the day. Currently though, if they unbanned Yata-Garasu, I'm not even sure if it would see play. The ability to just have your opponent skip their draw phase isn't a super big deal anymore, and there's already better cards that try to stop your opponent from playing the game anyway, where the limitations on Yata-Garasu would be kind of too much in the modern metagame. Unless I'm missing something super secret broken combo, I'm sure Yata-Garasu would be perfectly a-okay to be unmanned without an errata, and it's a wonder why it's still on the ban list in the first place, as the card has never come off the ban list ever since it was added over 15 years ago. And at number 9, we have Light and Darkness Dragon. This card cannot be special summoned and simply has the effect on the field that it's also treated as a dark attribute monster, which is just kind of flavor. The real benefit of this card and why it saw play in the past is because it kind of works like an Appaloosa Bow of the Goddess, but one with a mandatory effect that works on everything and not just monster cards. Once per chain, when a player activates a card effect, this card will try to negate that card effect and then lose exactly 500 attack and defense. So it also negates your own cards, since it's a mandatory effect, so you have to be careful when you use it. If this card is not able to fulfill the cost to reducing its attack and defense by 500 points, it can't activate its effect. Which means once it goes down to 800 attack, it kind of just stops working, since its defense would be at 400 as well, and you can't lower it by 500 points without going into negative numbers. In which case, you can just flip it face down in order to reset its attack points. It also has another effect that if it's destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you get to special summon one monster from your graveyard, but also destroy all other cards you control. So this card is really all or nothing. It negates everything but your stuff as well, and when it's destroyed it gets to special summon something, but not before it destroys all your stuff as well. And the card saw a lot of competitive play in old school Monarch decks before the new wave of Monarch spell and trap card support kind of changed how those decks play. Since Monarch decks used to kind of only use one monster per turn with the normal summon, and used a handful of hand traps in order to protect themselves, Light and Darkness Dragon could just negate everything your opponent tried to do, and then replace itself on death with another card that you could just tribute on your next turn for a Monarch. You could also tribute your Light and Darkness Dragon with a Monarch in order to get rid of it yourself and continue your own plays. Although Light and Darkness Dragon saw the most amount of play in Dragon Ruler decks in 2013, since it itself was a dragon, and that deck was very monster effect heavy. The negates that Light and Darkness Dragon can leave on the field were pretty good, and they could tribute the card with one of their Dragon Rulers in the same way Monarchs could in order to get rid of it during their turn. And they also mainly played from the graveyard, so they didn't really care about having cards in the field destroyed with Light and Darkness Dragon's floating effect, and it was kind of a staple addition in full power Dragon Rulers. Although it doesn't really see play in modern day, the negate of Light and Darkness Dragon was always something you kind of had to play around. And with how many better negates there are in the game nowadays, you don't really need to bother with the maintenance of Light and Darkness Dragon anymore. And at number 8, we have Apoqliphort Towers. This card has the effect where it cannot be special summoned and requires 3 tributes for its tribute summon, specifically 3 Klee monsters. And while this card is on the field, it's unaffected by all spell and trap cards and the effects of monsters who have a lower level / rank than this card's current level, which is always level 10. It also passively lowers the attack of all special summoned monsters by 500, and has a once per turn effect where you can force your opponent to send one monster from their hand or their side of the field to the graveyard. This effect does not target and actually gets past a lot of immunity since it's forcing your opponent to perform an action instead of actually affecting a monster. So it's one of the few ways to get rid of an immune monster like Ultimate Falcon, or another copy of Apoqliphort Towers. And this card used to be incredibly oppressive when it first came out, as the Qliphort archetype was able to get out as tribute fodder very easily, and some of their cards even had extra effects when they were tributed. So you could just kind of gain advantage while bringing towers out, while also being able to search out towers super easily, and it was almost impossible for your opponent to actually get rid of the card once it was out. Towers came out before the kaijus did, so it was almost an unbeatable boss monster that people thought was unfair, which is why the card got banned eventually, and stayed banned until Link monsters came out and made its protection almost worthless. Because the card was, for all intents and purposes, immune to card effects, unless a monster happened to have a level or rank of 10 or higher, which a lot of decks did not have, or could get a monster with more than 3,500 attack on the field, since it lowered the attack of all special summoned monsters. One of the more popular ways to get rid of towers was to use a lesser known Xyz monster called number 52 Diamond Crab King, since it had this unique effect where it had 0 attack baseline and you could detach one of its materials in order to change its attack to 3,000 for the turn. And because of the unique way this card gained attack points, it technically went under the effect of towers and wasn't decreased to 2,500. So at best, Diamond Crab King could beat over Apoqliphort Towers by just suiciding into it. So even the popular out to the card required you to lose advantage in order to do it. But since Link monsters don't have levels or ranks, they completely ignore Tower's immunity and can get rid of it no problem with one little unicorn boy, which is why the card doesn't really see play even though it got unbanned years ago. And at number 7, we have Cardcar D. This card cannot be special summoned and has the effect that during your main phase 1, during the turn in which this card was normal summoned, you can tribute this card in order to draw 2 cards. Then it has additional side effects where it immediately becomes your end phase and you also cannot special summon during the turn you activate its effect. So the card is kind of super restrictive in everything it does. It can't be special summoned, it requires you to use the effect during the turn it brings itself out, it doesn't let you special summon anything else, and then immediately just ends your turn. But it lets you draw 2 cards, so it definitely saw play, and still occasionally sees niche play because that's really good. The ability to draw 2 cards is just so good that a lot of players are willing to put up with all kinds of restrictions in order to do it. Just look at Pot of Desires or Pot of Extravagance. They require you to banish a crazy number of cards from your deck or extra deck in order to use their effects, and they both see all kinds of competitive play because drawing 2 cards is just that valuable. Cardcar D isn't as versatile in decks that can be used as those 2 pot cards, but in the decks which don't mind giving up the normal summon or special summoning other monsters, they definitely play this card for the card advantage, like all kinds of burn or stall decks. Mainly Chain Burn, Mystic Mine, and Final Countdown decks like to take advantage of Cardcar D. All a bunch of decks that are very infamous in the Yu-Gi-Oh community. So if you see someone use a Cardcar D, it's a pretty good sign that you're about to play against an annoying deck. And at number 6, we have Amano-Iwato. This card cannot be special summoned and returns to your hand during the end phase of the turn that it's normal summoned or flip face up, and has the effect that while it's on the field, monsters cannot activate their effects. So it's a full lockdown similar to Mystic Mine, and Mystic Mine is one of the most played field spell cards in the game. The ability to lock out all monster effects basically means you can summon this card and not worry about your opponent's hand trap for the rest of the turn. However, you can't use your other monster effects either, which isn't a big deal if you're playing a deck that's all about their spell and traps anyway. So this card occasionally saw play in decks like Sky Striker, True Draco, or even Mystic Mine decks, as it was an additional way to use your normal summon in order to lock down your opponent for a turn. You see, if you could just negate the effects of Amano-Iwato during the end phase, you could prevent its effect from returning itself to your hand in order to keep it during your opponent's turn, where it's much more useful than bringing it out during your turn. The card has a very strong effect, but it's supposed to be balanced around the fact that it can only be on the field for a limited amount of time anyway, and uses up your precious normal summon in order to do it. But if you just use a card like Forbidden Chalice on it during the end phase, then you can get to keep it, and your opponent will need to get out a monster with more than 1900 attack without being able to use monster effects. And with how monster effect heavy a lot of combo decks are, that can be kind of hard to accomplish for a lot of meta decks. And at number 5, we have Majesty's Fiend. This card cannot be special summoned, and simply has the effect on the field where neither player can activate monster effects. So it's just like Amano-Iwato, except it doesn't return itself to the hand during the end phase. But it does require a tribute summon in order to bring it out, so it's a slightly harder to use Amano-Iwato, but there is a lot of decks that can provide the tribute fodder pretty easily, and also don't really use their monster effects. So Majesty's Fiend sees more play than Amano-Iwato in decks that specifically want to stop their opponent from using monster effects. Decks like Gren Maju, where their boss monster technically doesn't activate its effect and gains a whole bunch of attack. And they also play a whole bunch of danger monsters which provide easy tribute fodder. And at number 4, we have Vanity's Fiend. This card is just like Majesty's Fiend, except it prevents both players from special summoning monsters. Now, locking out special summons is stronger than locking out monster effects, so Vanity's Fiend sees slightly more play than Majesty's Fiends in basically the same kinds of decks. But funny enough, it's not played alongside Majesty's Fiend. Generally, decks that use Vanity's Fiends will choose to use either or, but rarely both. There's also a card called Vanity's Ruler, which is just like Vanity's Fiend except it requires one more tribute summon, and the card only prevents your opponent from special summoning monsters, which makes its effect strictly better, but since it requires one more tribute, that's kind of a little bit too much for it to be used as much as the other two cards. Even then, it did occasionally see play anyway, surprisingly in Necros decks, but Vanity's Fiend and Majesty's Fiend are kind of played more since they're easier to bring out, as long as the decks they're in are playing around their side effects. And at number 3, we have Denko Sekka. This card cannot be special summoned, and it has the effect on the field that while you control no set spell or trap cards, neither player can set spell or trap cards, nor activate the effects of spell or trap cards that are already set on the field. And since this card only requires your normal summon without any kind of tribute, Denko Sekka sees a lot of play in decks that want to shut down back row. This one card kind of just completely shuts down some decks while not really hindering the deck that's playing it very much. A lot of decks don't really use trap cards or other cards that are set face down, so they wouldn't really care about not being able to set cards, as they can still activate cards face up on the field. Denko Sekka enjoys lots of success as a side deck addition, and has kinda seen competitive play ever since it first came out in 2014, and is easily the second most played card on this list of all time. And at number 2, we have the Tyrant Neptune. This card cannot be special summoned, and you can choose to tribute summon this card with only one monster if you want. It has the effect where it gains the total original attack and defense of all of the monsters used for its tribute summon, and then it's able to choose one of the monsters used for its summon in the graveyard in order to copy its effect permanently, and change its name to that card's name. This card was kind of a joke card for a long time, and never saw any competitive success in the TCG. But once they released Lyrilisk Independent Nightingale in the OCG, the card kind of became crazy broken overnight, as it could tribute the card in order to gain that card's effect of being immune to all card effects, inflicting 5,000 points of damage to your opponent once per turn, and just passively having 6,000 attack. So the card got banned in the TCG before they ever released Lyrilisk Independent Nightingale, and will probably stay banned even if they do ban that one fusion monster, because the potential for abuse of copying other graveyard effects is just too strong for the card to really exist in the game. And at number 1, we have the Winged Dragon of Ra, Sphere Mode. This card cannot be special summoned, but it can be normal summoned to your opponent's side of the field if you tribute 3 of their monsters. And the ability to tribute your opponent's monsters to bring this card out, which can't be stopped, makes Sphere Mode one of the best forms of removal in the game, as there are a lot of immune boss monsters, or boss monsters that just have negates, which are usually very hard to get rid of with other forms of removal, like say a Raigeki. When Sphere Mode just kind of ignores all of that, your opponent can't really stop it from happening other than preventing you from normal or tribute summoning at all, which very few non-banned cards can even do. The Winged Dragon Raw Sphere Mode is currently the most played card on this list, and is included in a whole bunch of competitive side decks, way more than Denko Sekka, who is also very heavily played, I might add. Sphere Mode is just kind of better. And it's funny that the reason it's so good is not the reason the card was created. It was made as a way to allow you to cheat out the Winged Dragon of Ra easier, but no one even uses that card with Sphere Mode because it's kind of not the point of the card. They only care about its summoning condition to tribute 3 of their opponent's monsters, not the actual effect of special summoning the Winged Dragon of Ra from your deck and setting its attack and defense to 4,000. Alright, and that's the list. There aren't a lot of monsters that can't be special summoned in the game, so It was a surprisingly very narrow list to choose monsters from. Even so, if you think I missed some better cards that should have definitely been on this list, or have ideas for future videos just like this one, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments. And also, did you know I have a new Go to Sleep playlist, which has all of my highly edited videos on it, which is surprisingly one of my most viewed playlists on the channel even though it's kinda new. Link to the playlist will be at the end of the video right now.